Hello everybody, thank you for clicking on this video, and I would like to extend my thanks and gratitude for everybody that has taken the time to watch my previous video regarding beading, and this particular video I'm going to show you how I get started beading off of the loom. But before I get to that actual demonstration, I just would like to reiterate a few points. In the previous video I mentioned doing your beadwork off of a loom, you can cut your pattern and not lose any beads. Now this was a hat band that I had done a while back, and obviously I cut the extra length off, but for demonstrative purposes, here, let me get a little closer. Here's the hat band, there's the cut. No lost beads. You would actually have to cut the strand above and the strand below. Now, in the pattern that I'm working on right now, I had discovered I had added one too many rows to my count. So what I did is I cut the row below and above the string, and I was able to take the two halves, put them, line them up the way they were supposed to go, and then just bead them back together to make just the one continuous strip. So for me, I try not to make those mistakes, but eventually it does happen. But I just wanted to show everybody that, you know, doing beadwork this way, you can correct any mistakes by just cutting it and then removing the one bad row and then just stitching it back together. It's not difficult. The other thing that I mentioned in the previous video is about getting, well, let me just show you first. This is a hank of beads. Okay, there's quite a few beads in there, and with the pattern that I'm working on now, I had to get into my second hank, and that's why I mentioned in the previous video, if you're going to do this and plan a large pattern, you might want to think about getting an extra hank or two for your intended project. But that's what a hank of beads looks like, and I don't recall off the top of my head how many beads are actually here, because whether you buy number 10s, number 11s, number 12s, that count is going to change. And for those that might think, you know, a number 11 bead is like, you know, 11 beads per inch or something like that, that's not always necessarily true. Now what I have here, and I know the camera's not going to pick it up, but out of all of those beads, these are my reject beads. And I'm not showing this to show that there's a lot of reject beads. I'm saving these, and I save all my reject beads because if I need to do any rosettes, then sometimes I use these mist size beads to fill in a gap to make the rosette lay flat. So I try to save all of my oddball beads. Yeah, they may not always be the same color, but depending on how many oddball beads, if I need like a bone background to a pattern that I'm making, then I know that I have some bone colored beads here that are missized, and I can use those to fill in any gaps that I need to in doing rosettes. Now with that being stated, I also mentioned that if you buy like 11 size beads, you're not always going to get 11 beads. And I'm going to turn the camera around and I'm going to show you a project I had done previously to emphasize that point. So if you look real close at the pattern, it's pretty obvious that these are supposed to be all number 11 beads, but look at what the edge does here and on the opposite side. That's because these blue beads, which are supposed to be number 11s, are a little bit thinner than the number 11 white. So your patterns will end up doing this, just emphasizing the fact that when you buy number 11 beads, or maybe even number 10s, they're not all going to be the same size, and it becomes real obvious on a wide pattern such as this. And this pattern itself is actually 8.5 by 5.5, thereabouts. But you can see that you're not always going to get number 11 beads when you order number 11 beads. So to emphasize a previous point, when you get the graph paper and you graph out your intended design, and if you're shooting for something that's like maybe 2 inches wide, you have to bear in mind that your beadwork, this is what I'm working on now, this is the pattern, your beadwork will end up being, you know, sometimes 3-4 beads wider than what the graph paper, and let me just show you that. Now as you can see, I have the edge of the bead strip right to this outside line right here. This is the end of my pattern, and you can see that at this point I'm actually 3 beads beyond the intended stopping point, which would be right after this black. That white or that cream would be the end of the row right here. So again, if you're shooting for something that's precisely 2 inches, don't depend on your graph getting you to that 2-inch point, because your beads will end up being 3 or 4 rows wider. So just bear that in mind. So I would just like to mention why, for me at least, beadwork is truly a labor of love. When I first started learning how to bead, most of the people that were selling beadwork 30 years ago was getting about $3 a square inch. Now that price is up to about $5 per square inch. And the pattern that I'm working on now, I'll kind of show you what I've got into it, and you can kind of understand why, for me, this is a labor of love. Okay, so this bead pattern is right just a hair over, maybe 1 bead over 2 inches. Okay, and the other day before recording this, I took my stopwatch and I timed how long it took me to do this 1 row at just a hair over 2 inches. And I did that 3 times, and I got an average of about 5 minutes per row. And if you put the ruler at the 1 inch mark, and I counted off, it's 12 rows. 12 times 5 is 60. There's 60 minutes in an hour. So to do that much beadwork took me an hour. It's truly a labor of love. Now, with today's prices, let me see if I can, I've actually got quite a bit length into this already. I'm going to measure this out. I've got the camera zoomed, so it's not gonna, you're not going to see the whole thing in the zoom. But as of right now, I am at just a little over 24 inches, 2 feet. So I've got, what, 48 square inches into this beadwork, times $5 an inch. I would be hard-pressed to sell this for over $200 as it stands, but I've got another 2 feet that I want to do, because my intended purpose is to be able to cut this bead pattern in half and have half of it, you know, shoulder strips on somebody's buckskins or even a leather jacket. That's my intended purpose. But also I want to make it that long, because, and then not cut it, because if somebody would desire this as a belt, then there would be more than enough length to sew it to a piece of leather and make a belt out of it. So, but the point that I'm trying to emphasize, that when it comes to beadwork, it truly, truly is a labor of love. And to be honest with you, a lot of the beadwork that I do, I either discount it because I'd rather see my work on somebody's person than to just carry it from rendezvous to show and just have it sit on the table. And or a lot of times if somebody really likes this pattern, this design, and they don't have quite enough of the financial money to buy it, I do trading for it also. So it benefits me and it benefits the customer. So now that I've got all of that out of the way, let me show you now how I get started beading these patterns. Okay, how to get started. Well, first of all, you have to have your needle threaded and ready to go. Okay. When I get started, and because I have years of experience doing this, I start, and you'll have to start also with the first 2 rows. Okay, so once you get used to this, you'll be able to start with your colors because you know what color is going to be placed on top of the other color. And because I don't know in this particular pattern how it's going to end with my desired length that I'm shooting for, I can cut this row off right here because it's all one solid color. Now you can, if you want, start your first 2 rows as a solid color, particularly like I did with this pattern here. I started with my 2 rows the same color. So here's my needle and thread. What I do is I wrap, let me get in the camera here. I'm looking at everything upside down. So, okay, just take a length of thread, wrap it around your fingers a couple of times and hold it. Grab 4 beads. Now I'm using number 5 beads so that you can kind of see in the camera how this is actually going to be instead of trying to show you this with number 11 beads. So I got my 4 beads on there. I'm going to pull my beads over, let's see here, over to my fingers. Okay. Then what I'm going to do is take my needle and go to the bottom of the 4 beads and run it through all 4 beads. And when I get that string pulled back to where I need it to be, I'm going to put 2 beads on top of 2 beads. There we go. If you can kind of look and see, so now I've got the 4 beads, but they're actually sitting on top of each other. What I do then, leaving the length of string there just in case, you can see where the top thread, whoops, maybe not, you can see where the top thread comes through the beads. Take your needle thread, and that's your needle thread, and then place it back through the bottom 2 beads and lock them all together. Okay, you go through the bottom 2 beads and then back up through what would be the top 2 beads. And make sure when you position them and make your string taut, let's see here, they're on top of each other. I'm hoping the camera can pick it up. Like I said, the way the view screen is for me right now, everything's backwards and upside down, so please be patient. And I thank you for your patience. Okay, so once you got those 2 locked in place, because these are number 5s, I'm going to go ahead and just pull it a little taut. With number 11s, you wouldn't be able to do that. So for the demonstrative purposes, I'm going to lock them down one more time. Go through the bottom and then back up through the top. And I know the string is still going to be loose because they're number 5s. So I'll try not to disrupt it anywhere here. Okay. In fact, I'm going to go through one more time so that I can work away from this string right here. Okay. Next, I grab 2 more beads and do the same thing. Since your needle is coming out of the top bead, you want to insert it through the bottom singular bead. Don't go through both of them again. Just go through the 1 bead, pull them taut, get them positioned on top of one another, and now you can see at this point I have to go through 2 beads. The previous bead and now the bead that I'm putting on top of that. Now I've got 3 rows on there. Same thing. Gonna grab 2 more beads. They're on my needle, and I'm going to run my needle through the bottom. Single bead. Pull them taut. You can see that they're positioning on top of one another. The second bead back, and I'm going to go through those 2. Then I will do that across the entire length or the width of what I want. Now, once I get to the length that I want and I want to start the next row, this is where you need to be a little patient and just realize that as small as this row of beads is, they're hard to hold on to. Again, these are number 5, so they're not difficult, but when you get to the number 11s, they're going to be a little difficult. And once again, or just emphasizing, pay attention to what you're doing, because if you don't go through the second bead and you make a mistake and go through the first, then you're going to see your string at a diagonal. So just, kind of pay attention to what you're doing. Go through the 2. Now, I'm going to lock these down. I've got 5 beads on here. So when I get to the end of the row, okay, I go through the 2 beads and back through the top 2 beads. And that's how I lock down my rows. Now there's a reason why I go through the 2. And I'll show you that here in just a moment. So, starting the next row, look at your pattern because you're going to be working on opposite ends. See? Okay, so I'm going to grab 2 beads and I'll put the 2 beads on top of the last 2 beads and secure them. And I'll go through that row twice. Okay, you can see where the string is coming out of the bottom row. These 2 beads will be the start of the next row. So I go through those 2 and then I go back through the bottom 2 because this is going to be the edge. And in a lot of cases, when this gets applied to, leather or whatever, your edge beads are going to take the brunt of the use. Okay? So once I get those 2 locked down, then I'll go to grabbing 1 bead and putting on 1 bead at a time until I get to the opposite end of my work. And one thing you don't want to do is pull them. See, I don't know if the camera's picking up, but you can kind of see right now where the end of the loop is wanting to loop around the end 2 beads right here. Don't do that because it's going to make your work come out wrong. And if that string does ever break, your work is going to come loose. Okay? So, and I only go through the 3rd bead 1 time. So let me get these up. Well, I'm at the end of my row, so now I got to put 2 back on because I'm only working with 5 beads here. So I'm at the end of my row, grabbing 2 more beads, go through the end of the row, and it places those 2 beads on top. Once again, go through them twice because you want to lock them down, and you also want to have a little bit more supporting thread on the ends of your work. Okay, so let me go through one more time and then I'll emphasize, at least for me, why I think it's important to do the bead work the way I'm doing it right now and putting on the end beads 2 at a time. Okay, so that's 3 rows. Now the reason why I recommend putting on the last 2 beads, because when you go to sew this down, okay, when you go to sew this down, what you really want to have is the room for the needle to go through those 2 beads without accidentally sticking it through the string. Now, the gentleman that taught me how to do this, he just puts them on one at a time all the way to the end, and then he really doesn't care whether he cuts a string sewing it onto anything or not. I care about that. So the last 2 beads of any of my work, let me see if I can get that piece I'm working on, and hopefully I can show it just maybe a little bit better. So if I'm going to sew this onto a piece of leather, the last 2 rows do not have a string between them, whereas every other one of these rows has a beading string through them. So if I was to stick my needle through that, I risk a good chance of going through that thread, breaking it or weakening it at least. But on the edges where I sew all my work down, I know that there's no string in between those 4 beads, so I can safely go through those beads in attaching this to what I want to attach it to without breaking the string. So that's something that you might want to keep in mind once you start learning to do this. And yes, it's a labor of love. So anyhow, I hope that this was enough of a demonstration to show you how I get started doing the beadwork off of the loom, and how much time truly is involved in doing this type of beadwork. And there again, pay attention as much as you can to your count, your bead placement, where your strings are, because I'll tell you, as I mentioned in this particular beadwork, the way my count goes, I've got 3 brown beads here, 3 brown beads in this section, then I go 4 and 4, and then I do something different. Well, I got to looking at it, and I actually had 4 rows right here. So all I did was just cut those 2 rows out, and as I demonstrated with that smaller piece, I just put the 2 pieces together like this. And I just followed that same stitching pattern. Just put the thread through the 4, leaving the room for the needle to go through the 2 end pieces, and then just stitch them on one at a time all the way across, so that by the time you get done, by the time you get done, you won't even be able to notice that I actually repaired it that way, because I missed my count. So anyhow, I hope that this will exemplify the beadwork and the process and how much time it takes. But once again, it is artwork, and in my opinion, you can't rush artwork. So friends, thanks for watching, and then the next video, let me get something here and show you. I'll show you how to do the brick stitch. If you take a look at this pattern, these beads are not laying on top of each other. They're actually laying in between them. So you would do your row and then start the next row, and then the beads, like brick work, it's actually staggered. So in the next video, I'll show you how to do that. Thanks for watching. I hope that you'll take a moment to like and subscribe. And if you have any questions, feel free to leave them down in the comment section. And when I get some time, I'll go through the comments and see if I can answer any of your questions. Everybody, have a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Be safe, and thank you for watching. Bye.